Three, two, one. What is up, everybody? You are listening, you are watching to the Constant Elevation Podcast. I am your host, Gabe Rock. Hope everybody's doing. We're already in the month of doing well. We're already in the month of September. Things are going well here in the house. So, going to give you some behind the scenes stuff because it just happened before I hit record. It was pretty funny. So it is Saturday morning, and I'm recording this episode in my office. My office happens to share a wall with Benjamin. And so this morning, the wifey and I were putting together a futon here for when Lana and her boyfriend Rolando come visit us in December. So we're just making sure, this is basically my office is / guest bedroom. So we're trying to make sure everything is right. And so she found a good futon on Facebook Marketplace, and then she picked it up yesterday, and then we're putting it together this morning. So when we had to take it apart, put it in her car, and put it back together. So like most IKEA stuff, like it's pretty, you have to put it together. It's not just one solid piece. And so sometimes the pieces fit, don't fit, whatever it is. And some of the pieces weren't working correctly. We were just trying to screw them on in and out. We had the Allen wrench there, because everything in IKEA, you have to make with an Allen wrench. And so as we were building it, this office has tile. So you're kind of you're tightening it up. You drop it. We were dropping a lot, apparently. And so, it's just frustrating building furniture. And so the wifey and I were having probably louder conversation than it need to be. And so this is around 8 o'clock, 8:30. It is not super early, but it's early-ish. And so I'm recording this around, what time is it now? I think 10:30 or something like that. And so that was around maybe 15 minutes ago. And I was like, well, hold on. Maybe I should not record a podcast episode. And Gina goes, why? Do you talk loud? I'm like, well, I don't talk softly when I'm recording. She goes, yeah, maybe not, because he's still sleeping. And then I go go back in the bedroom to do something, come back out. And she's like, oh, Ben's awake. And then I was like, oh, cool. I didn't want to, I was almost going to not record a podcast episode just because I want to be, I was going to be talking too loud while you're still asleep. And he goes, yeah, because you were definitely being quiet when you're building furniture and you and mom are talking and arguing and all that kind of stuff. I was like, oh yeah, whatever, I don't care. And so I was like, yeah, you're not wrong. And so that was just really, really funny. Just kind of behind the scenes stuff of depending on how and when and how I find the opportunities to record this content, I just try and make it happen. This one almost didn't happen because I have to have my mind in the correct spot and have the topic and subject matter really honed in before I decide to hit record. And finally this week did culminate towards something, and I wanted to make sure but I had to have my mind right. But apparently I had to do that. Normally I get that by Thursday afternoon. It didn't happen. Maybe it's because of the short week after Labor Day weekend. And so, but whatever, I'm here this week with some new content here. But yeah, behind the scenes, just in case you want to know how some of this works. And fuck man, he needs to wake up earlier. Anyways, he did work last night though. He's making some money. He's a good kid. Just kidding. Okay. This week, what I want to talk about is transparency. And so I do when in the air of always wanting to be transparent, especially at the leadership of the adult table, we tell as much people as possible, especially when it comes to when we are either organizing change or trying to drive change in an organization, reinforcing the idea of transparency is very, very important. Part of it is because you want to make sure that people are following along with the story. We're knowing how we're not hiding anything behind the curtains and then just at the very, very last minute trying to show people what's going to be happening, and then that very it could be an aggressive jolt that they may or may not be ready for. So part of the benefits of transparency are being able to kind of slowly introduce ideas, get collaboration, get buy-in as to when the change has happened. The team as a whole is actually part of that change versus just accepting it and receiving it. And so there's still the organizational hierarchy, especially in the military. And so those kind of pieces are where we're trying to get, in my opinion, the leadership actually owes to the rest of the formation. They're the ones charged with the idea of transparency. We at the adult table have to show everybody kind of our homework and our ideas as they start to get, even if it's not necessarily fully baked, the idea of continuing to kind of eke out correctly shaped information is going to be very, very important. And so, but even this week, I did find some places where sometimes transparency isn't appropriate. And that's what I want to talk about this week, is basically the two sides of the spectrum of change, when you need to be restrained with transparency and when you need to go full on and make sure that you are being as transparent as possible. So I'm going to start with the idea of when you need to be restrained, because I think that's probably a little bit more it goes kind of counter what you're going to hear a lot of people saying, especially in leadership. Like, we're trying to be fully transparent with this process and how we're going to do things. And it's like, but are we going to be fully transparent? Because sometimes there's going to be some reasons why we should not do that. And some of the number one example is kind of obvious when conversation subject matter shouldn't be transparent is if it's going to be confidential, right? And so obviously, like if you're having a hard professional discussion of feedback as far as how someone, like performance wise, if they're doing good or bad or indifferent, those are very restricted conversations, right? We call them, like, if I'm having like a mentoring session with someone, I'll call, like, all right, here in the skiff of trust, I'm going to share with you some information, either personally about me or a certain situation that I'm not asking, do not repeat outside of this conversation, because there's some level of confidentiality that I want to maintain to just facilitate the conversation, right? And so a lot of those personal, and then if we're talking about family situations, stuff like that, whatever's going on in your family, depending on, that's going to be up to you if you choose to share it, right? I tend to overshare. And so, but it's usually this, it's all lighthearted stuff, right? Just things that, like, I do this as a bridging technique to understand that, like, yes, depending on, I don't want people, I don't think people are intimidated by colonels anymore, but they could be. So that idea of, hey, so yes, I'm a group commander, I'm a colonel, but I'm also a husband, I'm also a father, I'm also a son, I'm also a coach, all those other hats that I wear. I overshare those pieces because I want to have some sort, I like to build that bridge of familiarity and be like, yeah, we experience the same thing. Just our life still continues to happen for all of us. And so I want to make sure, I don't mind sharing the kind of things that I'm going through because all of us are going through there. And I actually like hearing lessons learned and just kind of building, because I feel like when I can get those pieces and the bridges built, the trust actually becomes a little bit easier. That's where people feel more comfortable sharing with them some of the things that are weighing heavy on their mind, but they feel more comfortable sharing with me. So that idea of understanding there's going to be a point, there are certain times where transparency is not appropriate. Times when there's confidential, times where things are not fully baked yet. This goes into my second point. I think sometimes, so one-on-one conversations are good. And I believe sometimes a one-on-one conversation with someone before you go to a larger team. So for instance, this week, prior to going to the adult table, where there's roughly, I think, like 7 or 8 of us, I had a one-on-one conversation of one of the adults at the adult table. And really because, one, that person was leaving TDY, so I wanted to make sure I got their thoughts before they departed. 2, it was an idea of, hold on a second, we were kind of chatting back and forth. It got to the point where, like, online chatting. It got to the point where, hold on a second, let's just have a conversation. And so we had like about an hour conversation in my office where really, it was good. It was kind of like sausage making, a little bit of deconfliction of ideas and clarification of ideas, like, oh, this is what I meant. Okay, cool. Because I was the one that kind of prompted the conversation. I built some of the slide decks and some of the information being presented eventually to the wing commander. And they had some disagreements with it. And I think it was more of a thing of I felt a certain way because I felt like I should have done a better job of articulating it. And so I took that as a personal thing I need to improve upon. And he was like, no, it was fine. We just needed to talk about it a little bit more. So we actually understood, because you only can do so much electronically, right? Those one-on-one conversations, personal interactions are very, very valuable. So we had, that hour was awesome. I got to we both were now on the same page. And then I went to the larger adult table to present our unified, at least him and I, we'll call it unified. I'll say it's clarified information to present to the rest of the team. There was one point in time, someone's like, well, you guys are just conspiring together. I'm like, we're not conspiring. Like, it'd be one thing if the one-on-one conversation I had and I skipped the adult table altogether and I went to the wing commander. That would be a bad form. I didn't do that. I brought it back to the adult table because I wanted to make sure that all of us are still, the group at large are working together the way our boss expects us to. However, that one-on-one conversation was very, very important. And, he needed to have I do the same thing too. Sometimes I ask for a one-on-one conversation because I want to be able to ask questions, potentially stupid ones, in a safe environment, the way I'm not embarrassing myself, versus out in public amongst the rest of the adults who will be like, you should know those things. Like, well, I don't. So I'm going to make sure I level up my own knowledge to make sure before I step to the adult table and help make some important decisions. So that degree of restrained transparency, I think, is very, very important. And you need to be able to use that accordingly, depending on the situation. On the other side of transparency, this is actually really good. It's trying to educate and inform certain groups of people of how things are happen and work, or how things are going to be perceived going forward. So recently what we had this week, we just finished our captain stratification discussion. And so if you're not understanding what I'm talking about, usually in the Air Force, what happens is we now have all of our ranks have a certain performance period, and their personal annual evaluations end on a certain time frame. But it used to be all over the year. Now it usually ends on a certain specified month. So now that we are on a more restricted time frame, which I'm a big fan of, part of the drill is you must do stratification. In other words, you get to pick the number 1, 2, 3, and so on and so forth for who is going to be the top officer. In this instance, it was the captain strats that I was working on. So part of the drill was having the squadron commanders. They needed to come, and our deputy actually facilitated a conversation. They needed to come up with their recommended 1 to N list. And so they did. But it came to a real interesting point where it was basically 1A, 1B, and they could not amongst themselves decide who was going to be the number 1. And so they're like, well, we should talk to Colonel Bill and see what he says. Yes, you probably can ask me that. But I asked when the deputy kind of gave me an update, I said, no, make them pick a number 1. But we're going to have the conversation, obviously, but make them pick a number 1. That's part of the importance of this drill. So eventually the team did. And so I had the list in front of me, and then I said, all right, cool. I'm going to take a look at this, and I'll give you my final strat after we're done with this conversation. But we spent like a little bit over an hour on Thursday afternoon. I was more interested in doing the mentoring to show transparency of what I was thinking about as I approached this, and I wanted to understand their thought process. And so we talked about how I was like, to the 2 commanders, because the 1A, 1B in 2 different squadrons. I was like, what if I asked you to champion the other's captain? Could you do that? Just based on the information presented. They're like, I think so. I was like, would you champion as hard? It's like, maybe. I'm not sure. I was like, okay, the human nature is you probably wouldn't be able to, because obviously like you're trying to fight for your captain. However, at a certain point in time when I'm trying to teach them, and this is where I said in the transparency, I need you to take your squadron patch off and actually start thinking about, as a group commander, wing commander, and objectively look at this information, who should be number 1. Because that was the whole point of the drill, why I forced the conversation to make sure they came back to me with a recommended number 1. And then we started talking about how this records gets translated and perceived at a promotion board, how potentially this could be setting up the person 1, 2, 3 steps in the future to try and get a DO position, or they're trying to go to school or something like that. And so it was a really good conversation. I started sharing my experiences being on promotion boards, what I'm looking at when I actually have the wing stratification conversation with the wing commanders, and just showing some of the, not background information, but like just how the process works. So in the end, what they asked was, well, you're still going to you have to make your decision, right? Well, yeah, obviously it's my list. And so I have to, whatever the final decision is mine. They gave me basically a 99% head start. And then I get to look at I look at the records again, and I give my own, I do my own decision. So when I've thought about this was interesting. It was like, well, okay, once I'm done making my number 1, I could just be like, here's my number 1, number 2, and that's it. And then we stop having the conversation. One of the commanders was like, would you mind sharing some of your thoughts and ideas as to why you chose number 1? I was like, yes, I do. No, I do not mind sharing that information. I think it's actually very important for you to listen and understand what, and I need to show you my homework and be transparent of how I made my number 1 and number 2. So I started reviewing records yesterday. I did my whole thing, and I came up with my number 1 and number 2, wrote down my thoughts and said, here's my final, I think out of 10 captains, I said, here's my top 4. And then I shared my notes as far as, it's almost like if I was boarding, if I was at a promotion board. This is stratification board, it is different. But like that idea of, this is my thought process, and I showed them my homework as to why. I believe these OPB was actually written to a higher, the things that were captured in there had a larger impact compared to the other OPB. It could have been a writing style, or it could have, the way I read it anyway, is like the impact here was much stronger. We talked about winning awards. I shared that, like, just because you win an annual award does not mean you're number 1. Those are 2 separate and distinct factors, in my opinion. And I probably should have told them that early in the conversation. That way they knew that when they started doing their stratification conversations, that's how I actually would have perceived it at my level. And so just trying to offer transparency to the squadron commanders was important to me. And hopefully they gather some lessons learned and just kind of help shape their own experiences and their own mindset, because I'm trying to get them to my purpose is to grooming them in order to replace me. And so obviously they should be developing their own leadership style, but it's up to me as a leader to, in this instance, be transparent and share with them my mindset, share with them my thought processes as far as how we should be doing this important job within the leadership ranks of selecting our new up and coming rising leaders. So there you have it, team. Just wanted to talk about transparency and kind of like the two sides of the spectrum. I still believe in it. There's a right time and a right place. Just make sure that you find those places and use them accordingly. Final thing about transparency. I have been cooking. I have been in the lab cooking up some stuff, and I'm excited to say that I will be having and launching a new Constant Elevation merch store by the end of this month. I already looked at some samples. I'm building up the storefront. And so you'll be able to get Constant Elevation merch if you want to. This is going to be the way that you can support the show. And so right now, please go to constantelevation.co. Obviously, that's our homepage where you can find all this podcast content and some of the written materials. That way, if you want to reference some of the podcast episodes, I have some highlights that you can kind of use as some reference material if you choose to, if you're more of a reader than a listener, or you like both. But I will have I'm excited to launch a merch store. It was another challenge. I was like, I started having this same thought process when I was like, yeah, I want to write a book. Yes, I'm going to write a book. Then it became a thing of, yes, I'm going to open up a merch store, and I'm excited for it. And so I've been personally making some of these designs. I think when you see them, it's going to be reflective of me, probably reflective of my age group as well. And so if some of the stuff may or may not be for you, that's okay, because I like to do what I like to do. And so, but hopefully if you're interested, you can support the show here. So again, if you're not already, please subscribe to this podcast, either on YouTube channel or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And so stay tuned. I'm excited to share more information for our upcoming merch store, and looking forward to talking with everybody. Even if I need to talk loud next to Benjamin, I don't care what time it is, I will record a podcast episode, because apparently I'm not as sensitive as I think I am. All right, team, and take care of yourselves, and we'll talk to each other next week. Peace.